The next case is when you factor out the greatest common factor, and here are two examples of when you can do that. You just want to make sure that every term has a shared factor to factor out. So in this case, it's similar to the first one, but in this case, we don't have a constant. We have just the first quadratic and linear term. And whenever you have a quadratic and linear term, you can always factor out an x, but you might be able to factor out something else as well. So in this case, I say that I could factor out a negative 8x. So after factoring out a negative 8x, I'm left with x minus 8. And again, I want to do a quick mental distribution to make sure I did it correctly. So if I do negative 8x times x, I get negative 8x squared, and negative 8x times negative 8 gives me 64x. So I know I did that correctly. And then that's all there is. You already have it in factored form. So now you just need to take your two factors, set them equal to 0 to be able to solve for x. So I can divide both sides by negative 8, and I'm left with x equals 0. And then over here, I just add 8 to both sides, and I get that x is equal to 8. And that's our special case. Here's another example where you have a quadratic in standard form, and you really do have a quadratic, linear, and constant term. And so in this case, I notice that every term has a 3. So I'm going to factor out the 3 first so I can deal with smaller numbers to work with. So factoring out a 3 leaves me with 3 times quantity x squared plus 9x plus 8 equal to 0. And I'm going to do a quick mental distribution to make sure I did that correctly. So I get 3 times x squared is 3x squared. That's correct. 3 times 9x is 27x. 3 times 8 is 24. So I know I did that correctly. In this case, right here in the parentheses, we're left with something called product sum, which is the next type of factoring we're going to learn how to do. But I'm basically looking for what times what will give me 8, and what plus what will give me 9. So 1 times 8 gives me 8, and 1 plus 8 gives me 9. So I can write the following. And now I'm left with this. To make sure I did it correctly, I'm going to take x plus 1 times x plus 8 and make sure I get x squared plus 9x plus 8. So if I do x times x, that gives me x squared. X times 8 gives me 8x plus 1 times x, that gives me 9x, and then the 1 times 8 gives me 8. In this case, I take my two factors, set them equal to 0, and then I can solve for x. In this case, it's pretty easy just to know that x equals negative 1 and x equals negative 8 are your solutions. Because you can just look at x plus 1 and say, hey, what plus 1 gives me 0? What plus 8 gives me 0? And you can just look at it that way.